Okay, so I've talked about, we've defined psychology. We've looked at kind of what it is compared to other pseudo-type thoughts and the kind of the goals. Now what I want to get into is some overarching philosophies that, and these slides bring up certain people, but really human beings have been asking these questions ever since we started wondering about our own existence. So these names are just good examples of people who talked about it from a philosophical perspective, but really these questions are questions that religion asks, philosophy asks, even there's subfields of hard sciences like physics that ask these same questions. And truly, if we were able to answer these, the need for so many multiple thoughts and multiple religions and multiple everything would stop to exist. In fact, I'd be out of the job. Um, but these are the questions that we've always asked and we still haven't answered. Okay. And we're going to start with one of the most basic questions, and that is of nature versus nurture. Okay. And I'm going to talk about from a Western perspective the two people that really started writing about it in a detailed philosophical way, and that's Plato and Aristotle, who were both came up in the Greek times during the Greek Enlightenment years, and they're going to have two different views about the nature of people. Okay, Plato is going to see an organized world based on who's who who your parents were. I can't talk all of a sudden, okay? And what he's going to argue is that we are who we are because of who our parents were. Meaning we are who we are because we carry their blood, okay? And that everything that determines who we are based upon our lineage. Okay, in modern terms, if you're a pure geneticist, because we don't talk about it in blood today, we talk about it in genetics. If you believe that genetics determines everything about you, your attitudes, beliefs, the way you see the world, how smart you are, you're a naturist. You believe everything is based on biological, natural processes. Okay. Aristotle, on the other hand, is going to go observe the world. Okay. And he's going to look at where people are from a very different perspective. He's going to look at the world and he's going to notice that people are where they are in life because that's where they live. That's their environment. Okay? So a farmer is a farmer because he lives in the country where land can be tilled. A store owner is a store owner because he lives in the city, and that's what you do in a city. Okay, so everything is not determined by biological processes that determine who you are, but by your experiences in life, your nurturing aspects. Okay, and this will come up. Locke actually talked about this. The guy in the next slide. Locke was probably one of the most famous nurturers, because he said that we are all born with blank slates for which experience is written upon. Okay? If we were to put it in modern times, we are all born with a blank hard drive for which experience writes upon. Okay? Now, just some side notes about this idea is, okay, we got to remember there's an idealistic America and there's the real America. But the idealistic America, that everybody is born equal, comes from Locke's ideas. In fact, the Declaration of Independence was actually plagiarized. If Thomas Jefferson would have handed in the Declaration of Independence, he would have failed that class because he plagiarized the majority of it from Locke's writings about the nature of human beings as being equal, because we're all born blank and therefore experience rights upon it. Okay? So if you believe that who we are is who we are because of life experience, because of the way mom and dad raised you, because of the friends you had, because of the environment you were born in, you are on the nurture end of the spectrum. Okay? Now, in more modern times, we kind of think in between, that it's partly nature, partly nurture, and that may be due to the newness of genetic science. Okay? Genetics looks like a really hard science, but it's actually a very rough science. Okay? So for example, when we get to the personality section, I'll give you what's called a genetic quotient that states that your personality, who you are individually, is determined by genetics anywhere from about 30 to 60%. Because with our current day technologies, that's the closest guess we can get to say that genetics has anything to do with who you are. So if you think about that, that's anywhere from like a little bit to a little bit more than half, but we don't know the exact numbers yet. And that's how new genetic science is. Okay? But if I were to ask, how many, I want you to think of this dichotically and not on the continuum. How many in here are more on the nature end? That we're born the way we are because of genetics and blood? 2? Okay. How many are on the nurture end? 1. I'm surprised. 3, and then we'll just discount the rest. Rest of you don't count. No, I'm kidding. Usually when I'm in a room of educators, y'all want to be on the nurture end, because if you're on the nature end, that means your work is useless, because they're already determined to be who they are. So why are we paying you to nurture them? Good question. Anyways, this nature versus nurture question hasn't been answered by science. Okay, and this leads into the second philosophical problem, and that is the mind-body problem. Okay, mind-body problem is simply the idea: is the mind, mental life, the same as the physical body? Okay, are they one and the same? Meaning, is there a soul and is there a body? Or is it just the same, one and the same? Okay, there's going to be 2 philosophers who are going to talk about this. The first one is Descartes. Okay, Descartes is going to be the famous dualist. Okay, and his idea comes from walking in some German gardens. Okay, and in these German gardens, there's these huge statues. Okay, and when you stepped on certain bricks, it made the statue move. Through hydraulics from pushing on the thing, it would push water up into the statue, and the statue would move, and all kinds of things. Okay, and he's going to use that garden experience as his analogy for why there has to be a separate mind from body. Because he's going to say, for the body to work, the physical body to work, there has to be an entity that is pushing upon it. Okay? Physics is going to have the same thing. When we go back to Aristotle, Aristotle is what saved, in Western culture, is actually who saved the notion of God. Okay? Because people were really going down the road that there must not be a God because we have all of these secular notions of government and people. But he's going to note that in order to put an object into motion, you have to have another object act upon it. So if I want this to move that direction, I have to push it. Okay? Therefore, Aristotle's going to conclude that a universe cannot just create itself, it has to have an external entity acting upon it. He's going to call this external entity God. Okay? The same thing happens with the body, according to Aristotle and according to Descartes, is in order for there to be a physical body, there has to be a separate entity acting upon that body to make it act. Okay? So, is there modern day evidence of this idea? There actually is. Okay? You can have a perfectly healthy human body. Okay? And you can shock it, you can put probes in its head and make it electrical wired, you can do all kinds of things to it, but you cannot give it life. Okay? So you can have the perfect human healthy body, but unless something is acting in it besides pure physiology, that body will not exist. So in modern terms, that's what a lot of people feel is a reason why we think there still must be some type of mental actor acting upon the body. Okay? Now, Locke is going to say something different. Remember, he's the guy that says we're born with a blank slate. And so for him, there cannot be something pre-existing the physical body. If we're truly born equal, if we're truly born things, we can't have predetermined traits. Okay? And so for Locke, he's going to say there is no external entity that acts upon the body to make it do what it's going to do. Okay? Therefore, the mind and the body are one and the same. And again, we can look at modern times. Is there evidence for this? And there certainly is. If we cut out certain parts of the brain, the person loses functioning in certain mental capacities. Okay? If we give them too much of something, they experience something that they normally wouldn't experience. Give too little of something, and they stop experiencing things. Okay? So it seems that through ablation and all of these different chemical reactions and stuff, that indeed when you change the physical body, you change the mental state. Therefore, some of these physiologists have concluded that the mind and the body are the same thing. Okay? Now, why have we not answered this problem? From a scientific perspective, it comes down to the problem of consciousness. Okay? Because the one thing that science does not even have a technology to even begin to investigate is this. We know that your brain's electrical chemical activity is associated with a given mental state. Okay? So we can say that you're sitting here, you can see things around you because there's this electrical chemical reaction that is going on. What we cannot say is how that electrical chemical reaction results in your conscious state. Okay? We know how electricity creates a picture on a screen like this, but we do not know how the electricity going on your brain creates the picture that you are seeing. Therefore, we have only described the electrical chemical reaction, but we have no idea, no clue how that electrical chemical reaction results in what we see, what we hear, and what we feel. That is the unknown question. Okay? So, we just barely started, so that is the question that if any of you, because I know you're all smarter and you're going to go on and become great thinkers, that really is the question. If we were ever to be able to answer that question, all of these other questions would be answered. But we just simply don't know. Okay? Does that make sense, what I just said? Okay. So, on this end, how many in here are monoists, meaning that you believe that the mind and the body are the one and the same? They're the same entity. 1, 2. Okay. How many dualists do we have in here, meaning the mind and the body are two separate entities? 7. All right. All right. Very cool. Just seeing how weird y'all are. Don't worry. No, I'm kidding. I'm just joking. I'm just kidding. And then the last kind of philosophical question that a lot of the social sciences tries to answer or tries to get at, but we still haven't, is what is the nature of man? We should say the nature of everyone. And we can bring up two different philosophers who highlight these two ways of thinking. The first one is the English philosopher Hobbes. And both Hobbes and Rousseau, who is a French philosopher, are going to start with the basic premise that we are from nature. Okay? But they're going to have two very separate conclusions. Talking about the evilness of man, and there's no. Okay. Hobbes is going to look at nature, and what he's going to see is a very violent, a very predatory, and a very destructive world. Okay. Therefore, he's going to conclude that because nature is violent, awful, and bad, human beings are violent, awful, and bad. Okay? And both of these were talking about society. So he concluded the purpose of a society is to repress the natural natures of mankind. Okay? Now, Hobbes had a huge influence on our modern day criminal justice system. Okay? Because the purpose of laws, the purpose of jails and prisons is to repress the natural criminal tendencies in all of us. That's what Hobbes would argue, and that's what the original reformers of our criminal justice system thought. And so when we look at this from a criminal justice perspective, we need to realize we're taking it from a Hobbian philosophical perspective, that man's tendencies need to be controlled, and they need to be monitored, and they need to be repressed. Okay? Rousseau's going to come to a different conclusion, though. He's going to look at nature, and he's going to see a wonderful and beautiful balance and harmony. He's going to look at the mountains and not see glacial destruction, but he's going to see natural beauty. He's going to see that the predator eats the prey returns to the ground, and that gives life again. And he's going to see this beautiful cycle of life, that even within a predator, they're doing something good, okay? And so what he's going to argue is that people are good, nature is good, therefore people are good, okay? And it's only when people deviate from nature that we start to do bad, okay? So for Rousseau, evilness and bad things we see among people is because they're deviating from their natural or nature state, because nature is beautiful and is in balance and is good, okay? So really quick, survey in the room. Who agrees with Hobbes that we're born evil, and that purpose of, we can even say, education systems and criminal justice system is to beat that badness out of you? How many go for that? I shouldn't have stated that so negatively. No one? Okay. Okay, thank you. All right. Two? Okay. How many is going to go with Rousseau that what evil is due to deviation from what your natural state should be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. All right. All right. All right. So let's talk about evidence for and against, just a little bit. Okay. The evidence for the goodness of children actually comes from very, very recent research on infants that shows by the age of 4 months, most infants can tell the difference between a bad face and a good face, okay? So in this research, what they did is they took non-emotional expressive faces of people like Charles Manson and Hitler and a few other awful people, and then they took emotionally unexpressive faces of Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, and some other traditional, who've been thought of as good people, okay? And they'll present these pictures to infants around 3 to 4 months, okay? And they'll do some physiological and some behavioral observations, okay? And what they found is that when you present the pictures of Manson, the infant has a autonomic response, a stress response. And it starts to do withdrawal behaviors and tries not to look at the picture behaviorally, meaning they're recognizing that that is not something safe. Okay, and then you'll present them pictures with Martin Luther King, and their sympathetic nervous system turns on. A calming effect comes over them. They'll stare at him, and they'll actually do reaching behaviors towards them. Okay, this indicates that potentially we are already born with the notion of the difference between good and bad for us. At least it's some tertiary evidence, okay? Other evidence of maybe our nature has to do something with our moral fortitude comes from neurobiology of the moral tracts in the brain, okay? With infants, they don't start to develop a sense of I, meaning their identity, who they are as an individual, until the moral tracts of the brain start to turn on, okay? Now, there's an identity component of the brain that is separate from the moral tracts, so you got to think of these as two separate things, okay? And then we research on individuals who have Alzheimer's. We ask, when do they lose a sense of self, a sense of identity and who they are, okay? It's actually not when the self and identity areas of the brain are destroyed. It's when the moral track areas of the brain are destroyed that someone starts to lose a sense of self and identity. Okay? So that's kind of strange. Who we are, in the brain at least, is determined by the moral components of the brain before the identity components of the brain. So we have to have a sense of morality before we can even have a sense of identity. Okay? And a lot of people have argued that that is in support of Rousseau's notion that we're born good, and then the world, and then we deviate from that somehow. Okay? Evidence for Hobbes. We'll actually talk about that here in a few minutes with Mr. Freud. So I'm going to leave his evidence till then. But there is some evidence that maybe we are born in a way that we are evil, and that what we need is a good government to make sure we're good. Please ignore the bias in these statements. Okay. All right, so these were philosophical questions that we've asked. This last, and then the last kind of philosophical question isn't much of a philosophy, but how we should be answering these philosophical questions. Okay. Two important people to look at this is Wilhelm Wundt. He is considered the father of modern scientific psychology because he was the first to establish a lab in a university in Germany. So he's considered the father of modern scientific psychology. And then William James is considered the father of modern American psychology because he was the first to write a textbook and start teaching in universities here in the United States. But what these guys are going to argue for is whether or not we should look at psychology from a structuralist perspective or a functionalist perspective. Okay? If you think that knowing that when the amygdala fires, that is associated with fear, and that explains fear, you are a structuralist. Because you believe that all we need to know is what structure is associated with a mental or behavioral state. Therefore, knowing the brain structure that is associated with it answers that question. Okay? If, on the other hand, you ask questions like, why do I experience fear? What function does it serve in my life? You're a functionalist. Because you don't think it's so important to know that it's the amygdala. What you want to know is why in the heck do you have that in the first place? And what purpose does it serve? Okay? Now, in modern psychology, we go back and forth on this because neuropsychologists and neuroscientists believe that all we need to know is what's going on in the brain, and that explains everything. Social psychologists and developmental psychologists come along and say, no, that those structures don't explain the whole story. We have to know what's happening in the social world and in the thought world and all of these different areas. It's just not about a structural area in biology. Okay? So even still in modern psychology, we even go back and forth of what is the answer. Okay? But I just kind of wanted to bring that up because we'll actually see this throughout all the topics we have in this school, in this class, I mean. Okay? Now, I've started to kind of look at Oldham philosophy. Oh, that came out wrong. And I've only come across one so far. And I've been told that there are probably several philosophies here on the nation. dependent on the family, dependent upon how stories are told, dependent on all kinds of factors. So this is just one that I was told based on the man in the maze. If you all know more, please let me know. But this Occam theorist said that we have a duplicity in life, meaning what he stated based on the stories of the bun and the buzzard, that we have both good and evil tendencies. We're born with both. And the purpose of living good is to deal with both of those tendencies that are trying to vie for one's behavior or mental state. Okay? And he also stated that the true self is comprised of actually three elements. Okay? In Western culture, we tend to combine the mind and the soul. Okay? According to this Occam philosopher, the mind and the soul are separate from each other. He stated, and he based it, again, I can't remember the whole story, he based it on the man in the maze idea that you have to have a mind separate from the soul because your mind is made up of human living experiences, not spiritual experiences. And so those two need to be functionally separate from each other. Okay? And then he stated that both of these are separate from the physical body. So for him, you have to have a body, you have to have a soul, and you have to have a mind that connects those two things. Okay, so that was his philosophy. Do you guys know of any others? Like I said, I just began looking into Occam philosophy, and I've been told there's several. None? All right. If you do, please let me know. Okay. But this is one that I came across recently. So now that we've explored the philosophical questions and maybe some of the ways it's been answered locally, let's go into the specific field of psychology. Okay. I've already noted that Wilhelm Wundt and William James were the beginners of American psychology and psychology in the world. But one of the first kind of popular, he's not even a psychologist, popular honorary psychologist was Sigmund Freud. Bless you. Okay. Now, what Sigmund Freud is going to introduce to the ideas of psychology and mental processes is the idea of the unconscious. And I just spelled that completely wrong. There's letters right here, but that's supposed to be unconscious. And he's going to come up with what's called a psychodynamic theory that is structuralist in nature. Okay? Sigmund Freud was heavily influenced by the writings of Charles Darwin and evolutionary theory. Okay? Sigmund Freud is also a medical doctor who was trained in neurology. Okay? And he's going to take this idea of evolution and he's going to come up with what he called a psychodynamic theory of human behavior. Okay? What he's going to say is, since human beings have been acting, thinking creatures for such a long period of time, there must be a primitive energy that drives our mental world. Okay? He's going to call this energy or this component an id. It translates from German into English as it. It's the it of the mind. Okay? Now, the question is what traits, what things did Sigmund Freud decide are the primitive forces that drive all of our behaviors? Okay. Well, he's going to reduce it to two. Okay. He's going to reduce our primitive drives down to sex and aggression. And he's going to argue that all of our behaviors are aimed towards sex as the primary and aggression as a secondary drive. Okay? So usually I have a guy in the room, or some guy, so I'm going to use an imaginary guy. Okay? And I'm going to say if I was Sigmund Freud giving this lecture, okay, he would make the argument that this imaginary guy right here was not here to become an educated person. That he wasn't dressed and looking like he's taking notes and stuff in order to become an educated person. No, Sigmund Freud would argue that that person is here to try and have sex with all the women in the room. Okay? And in fact, it is a component of the brain, not the brain, but the mind, that inhibits him from doing that, and that's called the ego. Okay? The ego, instead of him coming in, because you can imagine if the only thing that guys and girls were trying to do was have sex with each other while beating up the person next to him, as a species, we wouldn't have survived very long. Okay? We would have died off a long time ago. So what Freud argued is the id developed the ego in order to take the external demands of the world and the needs of the id and produce an appropriate behavior. Okay? So what Sigmund Freud's answer to this young man right here is he's there looking cool and collective because, not because he would not argue he's here to be an educated person. He would argue that he would be here because that increases the probability of having sex with someone else in the room at a later date. Okay? And that is the primary motivation of human beings. Okay? What do you think? Think we're just sex and aggression, all pinned up? Yeah, we do. In my alter world, he makes complete sense. Okay. One thing we should know about Freud, and the reason why his theory probably sounds a bit strange, is he actually based it on his clinical population that he saw. Okay? And the people that he served were sexual deviants and women who had been sexually assaulted. Okay? And what he believed is he could take his clinical observation and create a general model of human behavior and the psyche. Okay? So if you take what he observed, sexual violence and sexual harm and whatnot, his model kind of makes sense. But he felt that it applied to everybody. Okay? And that was probably his biggest mistake. Okay? The thing that he did emphasize, though, is that we did not have conscious access to the id, that there was this whole entire world of the unconscious that drives our behaviors that we're completely unaware of. Okay? From a modern perspective, while we don't think it's sex and aggression, we do have a very, very robust unconscious world. Okay? For example, how much time does it take a person to decide that they're going to like someone or not? Give me some time in minutes, seconds, hours, days, weeks. How much time does it take? What's that? 8 minutes? A day? Okay. A week? Within minutes? Within seconds? Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So here is the physiological answer. When we hook up physiological equipment to people and then we measure their muscle reaction, it actually takes 0.86 seconds. The muscle reaction within 0.86 seconds predicts all of whether someone is going to like someone or withdraw from someone. Okay? It takes us about 5 seconds to become consciously aware of the decision we already made. Okay? You did. Yeah. Yeah. No. It takes 1/150th of a second. 1/150th of a second. So that's like 0.0015 of a second to recognize skin color. Okay. It takes 1/100th of a second to recognize language of someone. Okay. So what the idea behind these time things is are we aware of those things instantly, though, just like that? And the answer really is no. Our conscious awareness comes after a whole bunch of mental processing that we've already done. In fact, when we look at our neurobiology, all the senses except for smell go through the emotional and memory area of the brain before they're sent off to the conscious areas of the brain, or the cortical areas. So when you see something, that information stops at the amygdala and the hippocampus before it's sent off to the occipital lobe, where you can have a conscious reaction to it. So we're even processing information before we're even becoming aware of it, okay? Which denotes that we do have this huge unconscious world that we're totally unaware of, and it's persuading decisions that we think we have total and complete control over, when in reality we have to ask whether we do or not, okay? So while Sigmund Freud's theory still are huge in popular literature and in movies and stuff like that, the only thing we really took from him is, yes, we do have this large unconscious world that does indeed drive a lot of our behaviors, and we're barely starting to discover what all of those worlds are through more sensitive technologies. Okay? The next two schools in psychology kind of grew in response to each other. Okay? In the 1913s, we're going to get a bunch of writings by Freud that don't have sound scientific, and we're going to have a bunch of stuff that just doesn't sound right. It just doesn't sound like hard science. Okay? So really, in American psychology, we're going to get about 60 years of what we call behaviorism. What behaviorism is as a school of thought is it's more of a scientific philosophy. What Skinner, B.F. Skinner and John B. Watson are going to argue is that in order to be considered a hard science, the only thing that psychology should be concerned with are things that we can directly observe. Okay? And the things that we can directly observe are stimuluses in the environment and the reaction or the behavior of the organism. and that anything between the stimulus and the reaction, such as emotions, feelings, thoughts, don't matter. The only thing that we should study is stimulus and reactions. Okay? And this is going to be the basis of psychology learning theory. Because what we're going to see is that we have a stimulus, we have a reaction, and then if we're rewarded, we'll see that behavior increase. If that behavior is punished, we'll see that behavior decrease. Okay? Now, what's that going to do to America? Okay? John B. Watson, one of his most famous statements was, bring me your children, no matter who they are. They can have a mental deficit. They could be the smartest kid you know. Bring them to me, and I can make them into whoever you want them to be, whether it be an attorney, a judge, a garbage man, anything you want him to be, I can make him be by the rules of reward and punishment, or what he called operant conditioning. Okay? These guys were extreme Lockearians. They believed that the only thing that mattered was nurture and the environment. And that shaped all of behavior, all of personality, everything. Okay? This is going to influence our parenting. Because what this is going to, one of the things that John B. Watson is he wrote one of the first parenting books here in the United States, which is going to basically state, Mom and Dad, you and only you are responsible for your child's outcome based on your reward and punishment system with your child. Okay? And this is going to start the parenting movement that parents have complete and total control over their child's behavior. Okay? And this kind of sticks with us today. I mean, when most people go into a grocery store and they see a child throwing a tantrum, who do we instantly blame? The parents. Why? Because the parents, listen to this term, should have control over that child. This thought came out of behaviorism in the early parts of the 1900s. Okay? That didn't exist before. Okay? It's going to influence our education system. You know, when I was in school, we don't kind of do this a lot today, but it was the idea of repetition. So when I learned the ABCs, I went home and went ABC, ABC, ABC over and over and over. Okay? That was this too. Okay? So behaviorism had a huge influence, especially here in the United States. Okay? But it had some problems. In fact, the downfall of behaviorism was actually an argument B.F. Skinner made about language. Okay? He argued that all of language is a result of reward and punishing when kids use words. Okay? Then a response from Noam Chomsky, who I should say he just started teaching at the University of Arizona, by the way, just saying. He's a famous linguist. He kind of said, now wait a minute. Okay? The average child by the age of 5 knows 70,000 words. Now, and he basically said in this group, he said, I don't know about you, but I don't remember my mom saying good job or here's a cookie after each and every single one of those words. So how can it be just reward and punishment that creates language? Okay? And that actually started the downfall of behaviorism, and we'll get a cognitive revolution in response to that in just a minute. Okay? But when we talk about behaviorism, just keep in mind we're only talking about what happens when there's a stimulus and a behavioral response. And it can only answer those conditions. Okay. Now, behaviorism and Freud's theories has two kind of problems with it. And that is that they're what we call deterministic theories. Okay? So in Freud's theories, you behave the way you are because of your primitive drives. You have no control over those. In behaviorism, you're controlled by your environment. You're not controlled by you. So everything that you do is determined. Okay? What's going to come along is what we call the humanistic movement. Okay, we're going to get another group of psychologists who are tired of this deterministic model. Okay, and we're going to get one of our first motivational models here in psychology. Okay, and it's called the humanistic model. And if you've ever been to like a human resource training or something on motivation or something like this, this probably will sound very familiar. Okay? What humanists are going to argue is that we all are motivated to figure out who we are as a human being. Okay? What is our purpose and what is our meaning? That we're all motivated to that end. Maslow would argue that that's why you're all here, is because you're in this discovery phase of trying to figure you out. Okay? And the two leading figures in this was Maslow and Rogers. Okay? And this state that they're talking about was coined self-actualization. And to explain self-actualization, I'll actually use Rogers' terms. Okay? Self-actualization is when a person comes to such an understanding of who they are that they accept their good qualities and they go, yay me, but they also have complete and total acceptance of their bad qualities. And they understand why they have those bad qualities. And they understand that that's part of them. Okay? In a sense, this complete understanding and acceptance of oneself, I kind of want you to think of it this way. If I accept me for who I am, my good qualities and my bad qualities, then that means I can accept you completely for who you are, given your good qualities and your bad qualities. I have total acceptance for you. Here's the tough one, okay, is it must be acceptance for everybody. So this is the therapist, in a sense, who can work with a pedophile. Okay? Because they can go to that pedophile and say, I completely disagree with what you did, but by completely understanding you, I can understand why you did what you did. And that means I have to accept you. That's a very hard pill to swallow. Now, that's Rogers' definition of self-actualization. Maslow more or less talked about just understanding the self completely. Okay? But we get kind of this range. The question is how do we get to self-actualization? And that's where we have to turn to Maslow. Maslow argues that in order to get to self-actualization, we have to have some basic needs in place. Okay? The first basic needs are our biological needs. This is food, shelter, warmth, sex, and water. Okay? The second need we need to fulfill is our safety needs. We have to feel safe where we're at. We have to feel secure. Okay? The third need is relationships. We have to have strong, intimate, and familial relationships and friendships that are good for us. Okay? And then the last need before we can actually reflect on self-actualization is we have to have what are called esteem needs. Meaning we need to like ourselves. We have to think well of ourselves. Okay? It's not a self-centeredness. It's just this idea that I'm a good person and I'm okay. Okay? Now what Maslow and Rogers are going to say is in order to get to being a complete human being, you have to have all of these in play. Okay? And they're going to argue the reason why very few people will get to self-actualization is that it's very, very rare that we have all of these in line. Okay, so we could get a job, get a house, become stable in a decent neighborhood, and then we fall in love, and then we start reflecting on the self, maybe go back to school, but then maybe our house gets broken into. We lose our job. We get a divorce. We find a bout of depression. And we continue to have constant crises to where it's very difficult to have all of these things in place in order to actually reflect on being a complete person. Okay? So this is kind of the humanistic theory. Okay? And the biggest influence these guys are going to have is on the mental health and human services and social services field. Because if you go to a good provider, when they do an assessment, they're going to assess your biological needs. Do you have housing? Do you have access to food? Do you take care of yourself? They're going to assess your safety. Is there violence in a home? Is there gang influences? Is there do you live in a violent neighborhood? Is your home secure? They're going to assess your relationships. Are you in a strong, intimate relationship? What does your family connections look like? What kind of friends do you hang out with? And then they're going to look at your esteem needs. Do you have depression or anxiety? How do you feel or how do you report feeling about yourself? Okay? And these are all of the elements of a good psychological assessment. Okay? And so that's where it really has the biggest influence, or humanistic theory has the biggest influence is in that domain of existence. But for our business person, human resource people love this because a healthy business has all of these elements. Pays enough to make sure their employees can live, provides a safe working environment, provides opportunities to interact with coworkers, and provides growth opportunities such as continuing education and all those kinds of things. These are all the healthy elements of a good business. Okay? And so you'll see this model also in the human resources and that kind of arena. So, all right. Do you guys need a break or do we want to push through? I think you need a break. Let's take a 10-minute break. So let's come back at 10 to 2, and then we'll finish up. Sound good? Okay.